Get ready to hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the United States healthcare system. With your host of the Medical Truth Podcast, James Egidio.
Hi, I'm James Egidio, your host of the Medical Truth Podcast, the podcast that tells the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the American healthcare system. My guest is a board-certified cardiologist. His book about natural heart health, titled The Paleocardiologist, was an Amazon #1 bestseller. He has been named one of America's top functional medicine doctors and is a 5-time winner of the Natural Choice Awards as a holistic doctor. He founded Natural Heart Health, his heart health practice, and his online informational website, which is naturalheartdoctor.com. It is an honor and a pleasure to have on the Medical Truth Podcast my guest, Dr. Jack Wolfson. Dr. Wolfson, welcome to the Medical Truth Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, James. Pleasure to be on. And listen, cardiovascular disease, #1 killer worldwide, and just happy to bring the truth to all the listeners.
Thank you so much. For the listeners and viewers of the Medical Truth Podcast, a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. I am a board-certified cardiologist like my father before me, and I did 10 years of medical training, so 4 years of medical school, 3 years of internal medicine, took my boards in internal medicine. I was a board-certified internist, but then I immediately went on and did 3 years of additional cardiology training and became a board-certified cardiologist. And in 2002, when I finished up the training, I joined the biggest group in the state of Arizona as a hospital-based cardiologist. And I would spend 10 years in that group. Well, along the way, I would meet this young woman, and she is a doctor of chiropractic. And when I met her, everything was going well in my world, but unfortunately, my father was sick and dying of a Parkinson's-like illness. And the Mayo Clinic sees him, and they say, well, he's got what's called progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. We have no idea why, and we have no treatment. And then I meet this 29-year-old chiropractor, and she tells me exactly why my father is sick and dying. And what she had to say made total sense. I saw the sickness in my father. I saw the sickness all around me. And she said, if you want to avoid the same fate, you will want to become a DC like me. And I said, wait a second, you want me to become a DC doctor of chiropractic? I just finished up 10 years of medical training. I'm with the biggest group in the state of Arizona, phenomenally successful by all measures of conventional cardiology. I said, you want me to become a DC doctor of chiropractic? And she said, no, DC doctor of cause. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah. And I know that you had mentioned, even on your website, I saw where you talked about the dangers of statin drugs and, obviously a lot about cholesterol. So what I want to do is kind of unpack and ask you some questions about cholesterol and dietary intake and some of the things that the listeners and viewers of the Medical Truth Podcast should be aware of when it comes to cholesterol and controlling their cholesterol and so on and so forth. So what are some of the myths associated with cholesterol? Let's start there.
Well, chapter 1 of my book, and I do have this Amazon best-selling book called The Paleocardiologist, The Natural Way to Heart Health. And chapter 1 is called Cholesterol is King, because I want everyone to understand how important cholesterol is. Thank you. So, when we mention the word cholesterol, what comes to the mind of the, viewer or the listener? What comes to your mind? Well, when people think about cholesterol now, they've been preconditioned to think plaque. They think eggs. They think heart attacks. They think strokes. They think blockages in the arteries. When cholesterol is actually one of the most important molecules in all animal species. Then that's why an egg contains cholesterol, a chicken egg, because that's how a chicken comes to life, by various things, including cholesterol. Why does mother's breast milk have cholesterol? It's because that's how you feed the brains and bodies of babies. So cholesterol has been vilified for a whole variety of reasons, but it's critical for all of our sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. It's critical for our digestion because the liver puts it into the bile to help us digest our food. Of course, everyone knows that vitamin D is essential for total body health and immune support. And vitamin D comes from cholesterol. When the sunlight hits cholesterol in the skin, it converts it into vitamin D. And then ultimately, cholesterol is essential in the cell membrane, or the fence that surrounds every single cell in the body. So once you take a look at that and say, wow, that's interesting about cholesterol, it's very important. And now we start talking about how we want to optimize those cholesterol levels. And that's the strategy. But, this is the Medical Truth Podcast. And, the truth is that cholesterol lowering drugs, statin drugs, are the number one selling class of drugs of all time. We'll get into more about that, but they're there purportedly to lower, your cholesterol levels down. And it's a big mistake.
Yeah. And, I know a lot of people that are listening and viewing as, let's say, a patient, for instance, they don't really hear much about cholesterol until they have to go in and get, let's say, some blood tests done, right? And, then they start getting concerned about it when the doctor sits them down, or their doctor sits down with them and starts to say, well, your cholesterol is real high. So what are some of the components of cholesterol that are found in blood tests that one has to be concerned about when it comes to cholesterol?
Yeah, there's, when we think about total cholesterol, that's a measurement that was very popular in the 1970s, but still a lot of people are caught up on that. But there's many more advanced markers that we could look at to tell us what our risk is. And then we can do some different changes and then test down the road and see how we did. So when we look at markers like LDL particle numbers and particle sizes and ratios, what's called ApoB, ApoA ratio, we can get a lot more in-depth information than just total cholesterol. A very important marker that does happen to be genetic is called LP little a, LP parentheses little a. I'm not a proponent of genetics. I believe that we are built by God perfectly until man-made poisonous lifestyle causes us to be sick. Now, there is a particular marker called LP little a that I mentioned that is a genetic marker, but something has to negatively impact that particular person with those genes. And it's about 15 to 20% of people do have that marker, but most people, including those with cardiovascular disease, don't even know that they have it. So that's very important to look for. But the old time total cholesterol 1970s panel, we can do so much more and give people so much more valuable information.
Yeah, because you hear so much, again, when someone goes to a doctor, it's about, the cholesterol, but then there's that HDL, high density lipids, and LDL, low density lipid. What is the difference between those two for the listeners and viewers?
Well, let me make this clear that often LDL is called the bad cholesterol, but that's just pharmaceutical companies speak. There's no such thing as bad cholesterol per se. Now, LDLs have a purpose. That's why all mammalian species on planet Earth contain LDL and they contain HDL. They're a large part of our immune system. They help they're the buses that travel around the body, taking the passengers where they need to go. Now, who are the passengers on the LDL and HDL bus? Well, they're cholesterol, of course, as we said, as you need cholesterol around the body. For example, the testicles, they want to make more testosterone. So they'll call out to the liver, send down more cholesterol, and the LDL bus takes off and delivers cholesterol down to the testicles to make testosterone, and the ovaries get their supply, and all cells get their supply. So the LDL bus also contains things like CoQ10, fat-soluble vitamins, triglycerides, which is the food's source of energy. So there's a lot of things that the LDL does, and it's also an antioxidant. Same things with HDL. HDL is often called the good cholesterol, but HDL also has a purpose, and that's really to have that kind of anti-inflammatory component to it, but also to transport things from around the body that are no longer needed back to the liver for processing. Now, let me finalize that thought that there are bad forms of LDL and there are bad forms of HDL. The problem is that most medical doctors and certainly cardiologists are not testing for it, and we do.
Yeah. You must see where a lot of physicians will, as soon as they get the lab results back for a patient, rush to put a patient on a statin, a cholesterol medication. What are some of the drawbacks with that when someone gets placed on a statin right away?
Well, there's really two drawbacks. Number one is that they don't really work. And number two, they've got side effects. And I guess if there's a number three, they give people the false sense of security. You know, James, go ahead, listen, your cholesterol's high. Go ahead and take this drug and it's going to, help, lower your risk. But if we don't tell people about all the things involved in healthy living, we've really done them a disservice, which is why I've made the claim that statin drugs actually are responsible for killing millions of people. Not directly per se, but possibly. Indirectly, only in the sense of is that people can think they can pop a Lipitor and eat whatever they want, live however they want, and that unfortunately is a death sentence. According to their data, statin drugs lower heart attack risk on an annual basis for most people, for primary prevention it's called, by about 0.3, 0.4%. So that means we lower your risk from having a heart attack from 3% down to 2.7%. So we've missed out on helping 2.7% of the people. What if we say we want the heart attack risk to be 0% or close to? We know they don't provide that. And I believe certainly that we do. And we've seen some phenomenal results because it's really just addressing the cause through that lens of eat well, live well, think well. And, from a medical truth standpoint, your podcast here, all medical training, all doctors, all educational programs, all mainstream journals, they're all owned by the pharmaceutical companies. Right. So when you are only taught about statin drugs, that's what your life is. And that's how the cardiologist is trained. We're not trained in anything else. And the drug reps, they take us, certainly in my training, they took us on trips and dinners and golf outings. I'll tell you one story. I remember back when I was in high school, my father was speaking from Merck Pharmaceuticals and the developers of Simvastatin, which is called Zocor, is the brand name. Mm-hmm. And we went out to Hawaii. My father and mother, they flew first class. My brother, sister, and I, we were in coach. We stayed in a beautiful hotel for 7 nights. We had all the meals, all the food, all the drinks, all the excursions. Everything was paid for. My father spoke for 1 hour. 1 hour at that event. Now, things are not quite as bad these days, which is, again, many years later. But the point being is that what they did, even in those early days, was so instrumental in, the brainwashing of medicine and how that's carried through all these years, and ultimately how they own the medical societies. All you got to do is pick up any medical journal, the Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of the American Heart Association, the New England Journal of Medicine from Harvard Hospital. There's an article and then an ad, and it goes on, so on and so forth. So if you're trying to you refute any of this information, you're not going to go very far, right? That's why I'm on your show, and they're not going to necessarily interview me on CNN or Fox for this reason. So I do appreciate the opportunity to be on the Medical Truth podcast.
Absolutely. So what are some of the side effects to these? Because, they don't, like you said, they don't reveal too much about that. They don't make it public, obviously, until maybe there's a class action lawsuit or something by a law firm or something. So what are some of the side effects to these statin medications?
Well, just so you know, there was a statin that was the subject of lawsuits and class action. That was called Baycol. Simvastatin is what it was. And that was in the early 2000s, and that was abruptly pulled from the market. So here's a drug that was approved by the FDA and then removed by the FDA. And of course, there's dozens of examples of that. And what those people were suffering from is that they were suffering from severe myositis, muscle failure, kidney failure because of that muscle failure, liver failure, and that drug got pulled. All these drugs, again, they interfere with the body's ability to do its job. It's very, this enzyme that it inhibits, that the statin drugs inhibit, called HMG-CoA reductase, very long name, but it's a very important enzyme, and that's why all animal species on planet Earth have that enzyme. So. And when we inhibit it, bad things happen. We don't make cholesterol, which we said we need. They don't make things like CoQ10, which we need for cellular energy in the mitochondria. We don't make something called heme A, which is also in the mitochondria as part of the energy production. I don't want to get too crazy sciencey, but heme A, again, is very important as well. And then also just different things that it produces, including something called dolichol. And dolichol is a steroid-like molecule in the body that the main location of it is in the substantia nigra of the brain. And when you have failure of the substantia nigra of the brain, you have Parkinson's and you have PSP, like my father did. My father took Lipitor and now he's dead. Yeah. So I believe that if we were to test his levels of Dolichol, his levels were likely very low. Now, my father also had another habit that was not very good, which was alcohol use. And he wasn't an alcoholic. It didn't interfere with his life. In fact, his life was great on alcohol. He was a weekend warrior. He had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with him. A lot of amazing stories about my father, regarding alcohol, except for the fact he's dead. Alcohol also reduces the levels of Dolichol in the substantia nigra, thus leading to Parkinson's, PSP, and other health-related disorders. But statins have a myriad of effects, including muscle aches, muscle pains. I see it all the time, hear it all the time. Kidney, liver, thyroid issues. You're interfering with the body's ability to get the job done. So it's highly problematic.
Yeah. I did pull up an article about the demyelination as well, and they said these come from a scientific article about demyelination of the of the myelin sheath around the neuron of the brain, which leads to dementia. Have you heard anything about this?
Well, it's just, the myelin sheath obviously is incredibly important, and it is this fatty-like structure that, that occurs, and that data, that is being shown. There's some data to support certainly multiple, myasthenia gravis, multiple sclerosis, which also have many other causes as well, in addition to statin drugs, not the only one. And then regarding dementia, what they find in the dementia data is that it can be a little bit more statin specific. So statins can be broken down into the fat soluble statins and the water soluble ones. I think they're all bad, but most of the data on dementia really goes to the situation of the fat soluble drugs. Now, but that being said, there's just so much money still in this industry and still in this paradigm that it's just hard to get the truth out. And every effort is maintained to promote the benefits of statins, because again, the articles don't see the light of day, and they also lead to the end of the career for the researcher, or worse, to that individual person. I remember talking to a pharmaceutical CEO who came to see me as a patient years ago, and I'm like, you guys, is it possible that there are threats that are made, to people, and even including death threats, or you'll never work in this industry again? And he kind of chuckled and, didn't directly answer me. But, listen, Pfizer is $100 billion a year company. Pharma in general, 1.5 trillion in 2022. This is big money, and big money can make people very evil and do evil things. So, and let me close that and say, now more than ever is a time for two things: freedom of speech, to be able to question everything going on in this world, and number two, freedom of choice. Hey, if you want to put something into your body, go do it.
Absolutely.
But you can't force me to do it or force that upon my children.
Right. I know it. And this, of course, it sounds like it's going to go right back to the vaccines or the COVID, the bioweapon. And let me say one more thing too, is that, there is mRNA technology that will therefore develop antibodies that will attack LDO particles. So pharma will have that in their next toolbox to propagate their hundreds of billions in profits. And then also that Lp(a) that I mentioned before, there is mRNA technology for that. And it's just sad, because we're never going to outsmart Mother Nature. We're never going to do better than our God-given abilities, at least in the next several lifetimes, and potentially ever. And it's obviously, very unfortunate. Yeah, it is.
Meet Michael. He takes a medication to control his high blood pressure. Michael just realized he only has 2 days of medication and can't get into his office-based doctor for 2 weeks. Michael went online only to find QuickRxRefill.com, an online doctor consultation and prescription refill website. Michael logged on to quickrxrefill.com securely and made a prepayment, consulted with a doctor via telephone in the comfort of his home, and his prescription was called into his local pharmacy. It was the perfect and quickest solution for his prescription refill, and it was safe, secure, and private. QuickRxRefill.com utilizes U.S. licensed doctors only and is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee. If you're in need of a quick solution for a prescription refill, go to QuickRxRefill.com or call 1-800-485-5914.
And that actually leads into my next few questions here on some of the things that someone can do to minimize their cholesterol, high cholesterol in a healthy state.
Well, it's really all just is that foundation of eat well, live well, think well. So eat well to me represents a lot of things, but to me it's wild seafood, free-range grass-fed meats, nose to tail, including the organs, heart, liver, kidneys. Everything should be organic, getting all the pesticides and chemicals out of our food. And I also, number 4 is I'm gluten-free. So if we focus on the foods to eat, there's not much room left over for the foods not to eat. Right. I'm not a big fan of alcohol for the aforementioned reasons. It tastes good. I like the way I feel after a drink or two, but it's just not healthy, type stuff. It's just not. And if you do it, make sure it's organic. So get the chemicals out of our food. But eating well is only part of the equation. Living well is part of it as well. And so we think about the importance of sleep, sunshine, physical activity or movement, avoidance of environmental toxins. So we look at things like mold mycotoxins. Mold mycotoxins actually interfere with the LDL receptor. So we do not clear old LDL particles out of circulation because of these mold mycotoxins and certainly potentially other toxins. So mold comes from homes of people with water damaged homes and structures, which is just about everybody. And there was a famous quote that Ronald Reagan, of course, said, trust but verify. And that's what we really want to do, is that I trust you when you say your home doesn't have mold, but I just want to test it just to make sure. So there is unique testing for that. Mold is a 21st century health crisis. It is in the book of Leviticus. Moses talks about it 3,500 years ago, about how detrimental mold is and what to do if your home is contaminated from it. A couple other things, then live well, holistic dentistry, and of course, chiropractic care, but then think well. And think well, I think, is just as important, if not more important than everything else. When I talk to people with heart attacks and strokes, there was almost always a precipitating stressful event or a lot of stress in their lives. And the COVID myth over the last few years perpetuated that, the fear, the anxiety, which is exactly what they wanted. They socially isolated it. They destroyed communities. And again, that just breeds sickness. Yeah. So thinking well is all about finding your spirituality. It's about finding your purpose and your passion. It's about self-acceptance and gratitude. It is about finding your community. And communities have changed over the last few years. So you seek out, your brothers and sisters in the new community. God bless the old people. God bless the family, the friends who think differently than you. But you know what? They're in the rearview mirror. Have a nice life. Wonderful memories. Goodbye. It's all about, who we're going to spend our time with in the future, right, James? So I'm going to spend my time in the future with people like you, and people who I don't see eye to eye with. There's no reason in us like, hey, let's relive some old high school memories or, like that doesn't matter. We need to get together with the people going forward that we need to go with going forward, because the world depends on it. Our freedom depends on it. Our lives depend on it, and our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives depend on that. So it's really, really important to get the truth out there and preserve the freedom to question that truth.
Yeah. And I think we're at not the 11th hour, but the 11:59 hour of this whole thing with being able to, especially in the last 3 years with COVID, of being able to come out and be forthright with the truth about certain medical things. Like we're here talking about statin drugs. We could do an episode on the vaccine, the bioweapon, but it just seems like when you do get censored, to me, we're like right over the mark when it comes to, bringing the truth out, because, it's just the way it is. When you get censored, you're doing the right thing. It's a badge of honor when you get censored, it seems to me.
No, it's true, but it is obviously unfortunate because we can reach so many more people if we could have, honest debates,
Right.
with people, on mainstream and stuff like that. But there's just so much power in the pharmaceutical, military, industrial, complex. Big food, big ag, big, big box, this and that. It's tough to go against that. But, we are correct. We're on the side of truth. And you would say a lot of people, fell for it and they're not going to fall for it again. That may or may not be true once, once the gun is to their head or the needle is to their head. The other thing, and there's, of course, many different ways in which they could enforce what they want to enforce. But I think the next bioweapon that they release will be much more detrimental to the people's health, mental and physical, and therefore you will get people to bow down again and acquiesce to that, and there will be much fewer of us that are still standing. But listen, and that's why. And the important thing is that we need to continue these conversations, to continue with Medical Truth, podcast, get this information out there.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I don't think we're out of the woods on this whole, these bioweapons and more so-called viruses or pandemics. I just think this is going to be a continuous process. And,
I mean, I agree though. They will do it again. And shame on you if you're not prepared for it, because it will happen again. And when you say, and if you're someone who's like, oh, that can't happen again, like it just happened. It just happened.
Sure, absolutely. And we sit there and we talk about even proper diet, and of course exercise is goes without saying is very important. But even the food they're trying to control, not only the pharmaceuticals, but Bill Gates is buying all this farmland and trying to take and convert everything over to plant-based, artificially plant-based products. I just saw where a commercial where they were advertising for like a plant-based bacon. It wasn't even bacon. It was just a plant-based artificial bacon. I mean, you're talking probably something that's processed with a lot of chemicals and a lot of processing with lethal chemicals, right? I mean, preservatives.
Yeah, no, I mean, most certainly. Yeah, he is a very evil man, obviously, for what he's done in the pharma industry. I mean, what starving African children need is food and shelter and safety. They don't need injections into their arms. That's not what they need. And when it goes to risk factors for COVID sickness, and whatever COVID was is anybody's guess, but nonetheless, it appears the risk factors were things like vitamin D deficiency. So the highest levels of vitamin D, the least likely risk, you're going to have of developing COVID, morbidity, and mortality. So what do? Well, you get out in the sun with your solar panel in the sun, and you make a lot of vitamin D, and therefore vitamin D goes up and total cholesterol levels go down. So a lot of people with high cholesterol, it's a sunshine deficiency syndrome. We know that people with the highest levels of omega-3 from eating seafood had the lowest risk of COVID. We know people with the highest levels of glutathione, which you can measure all these things, have the lowest risk. There was an article that was from 2020, and that was the title of it. It says endogenous glutathione deficiency as the most likely cause of serious manifestations of COVID. So that should have been the promoting push all along, and that should be Bill Gates' message as opposed to the vaccine message. It just shows you how fraudulent they are. And that's all we can do is continue to do our best to get the truth out there, and hopefully God will help us prevail.
Yeah. So with that being said about the statins being as dangerous as they are, and there's been a lot of data that's been collected and researched over the years on that, what are some excellent nutritional supplement sources for high cholesterol?
Well, so really what happens is that the body doesn't make too much cholesterol. No one's makes too much cholesterol. The problem is it doesn't clear the LDL particles, because of a variety of reasons can lead to that. So there are some supplements that can help with the clearing process. Number one would be berberine. Number two, things like curcumin. Number three, grapeseed extract and things like that can help do it. But I'm a big fan of organ supplements. So when you eat bison liver, for example, it contains all the elements of a healthy bison. So that will support your body. We have a product which is a bison liver heart complex that's very effective. So again, a lot of it tends to be nutritional based, not necessarily supplements based. Time release niacin has a role. People ask about red yeast rice. It's similar to statins. I'm not a fan. So there are some strategies, and just a good old fashioned liver detox, just detoxing all those receptors. We talked about mold as a potential impossibility as well.
Nice. Well, I think is there any advice that you have to anybody out there that's listening and viewing the Medical Truth podcast as far as cholesterols and medications that they're currently on, or what's your advice to anybody that would be listening and viewing this?
Yeah, in that sense, and again, there are trials that actually show increased mortality on certain statin drugs. The Sparkle trial showed the statin users died earlier. The AllHat LLC trial showed the statin users died earlier. In fact, people who were 65 and older enjoyed 18% higher risk of dying on statin drugs. The Mr. Fit trial, AFCAP's TexCap showed the same. And there's another class of pharmaceuticals they use called PCSK9 inhibitors, extraordinarily expensive. And actually more people died in that trial that was reported in New England Journal of Medicine. So if you've got concerns, just get a second opinion. This is a partnership with you and your doctor. It's not a dictatorship. It's not my way or the highway. It's a partnership. Work with a doctor who resonates with you, who you can have a conversation with and talk about the benefits, talk about the risks, talk about other natural strategies. And that's, it really is, it's about gathering information and then you deciding on what's making the best decision for you.
Yeah. And it reminds me of an episode that I did on 8 things to look for in a good doctor, which was a solo episode that I did. And that was one of them, is this dictatorship of what everybody's been through with getting coerced into using. And I say forced. It's just, to me, it's word salad when it comes down to coerced versus forced to take this bioweapon that everybody took. But have that relationship with that physician where they give you the autonomy and they give you your God-given right to choose what you want to do with your body. Now, I'm not saying that, you split your head open or you get, God forbid, a auto accident that you refuse help. But when it comes down to, getting results back on lab work and going over, let's say, making the choice of taking a cholesterol medication versus not taking a cholesterol medication, then that should be your choice at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, no, it definitely should be your choice and definitely should be a discussion. Unfortunately, most doctors are not skilled in that discussion. But just like you said, listen, we're very, very thankful and grateful for the men and women who work in emergency rooms and trauma centers. No doubt about that. But when it comes to the prevention, the reversal, the recovery from disease, they've got nothing. They've got nothing in their toolbox. Statin drugs, aspirin, diabetes drugs, these new drugs that, semaglutide and, Ozempic and things like that they're talking about. They're all just poison pills. And you're never going to find happiness in those. You can have short-term success, but then ultimately you'll be one of these fen people who wind up with some kind of damage that will learn the truth about a couple of years down the road when they pull these from the market. But, again, it's just trying to cheat the system. The way that we work, ultimately, eat well, live well, think well, test, don't guess, evidence-based supplements, biohacking strategies, which can be things like sauna, red light therapy, IV, ozone, hyperbaric, a lot of different things, but just work with a healthcare professional that's very skilled in these things. And ultimately, in the end, trust Mother Nature, trust God, trust our God-given abilities with our bodies. Our bodies are spectacular. They are absolutely spectacular, and we can heal. We are built to heal always.
Absolutely. And it's such a breath of fresh air to speak to a physician and interview a physician that doesn't believe. And a lot of physicians that I've been interviewing are the same page as you are. as well. Again, that book, your book is right here. It's called The Paleo Cardiologist, and it can be found on Amazon. I know it was a #1 bestseller, correct?
Yeah, if people want to give Amazon money, go ahead, give Jeff Bezos money so he can buy up more farmland. And, but you can also actually get it from me for free. Freeheartbook.com. Freeheartbook.com is another link, and you just pay the shipping and we'll send that out to you. The book's 10 years old, but the tenets, in there are true. The data, of course, has stood the test of time. One place where I've kind of, reversed is on coffee. At the time when I wrote this in 2015, I was kind of down on the use of coffee, but I've since changed my tune on that as well. Just kind of like, taking a fresh look at the data on the health benefits of coffee, especially when it's organic and it's tested for mold mycotoxins. So that's pretty much the main thing that I change tune on about, from that book. But the website has great information. I've got other doctors, who work with me, a natural heart doctor, a team of health coaches. And, we got a big mission ahead of us. Cardiovascular disease, #1 killer worldwide. And we aim to actually eliminate that.
Yeah. And what is your take on coffee before we sign off?
Yeah. So actually, when you look at coffee, it actually shows that coffee drinkers have less heart attacks, less strokes, less atrial fibrillation, less cardiomyopathy. They have less coronary calcification. They also have less dementia and movement disorders, and they also have less cancer. And that's when you're drinking garbage stuff. So if you really drink good stuff that is organic, and then this is very critical as well, James, is to make sure it's tested for mold mycotoxins. I felt so strongly about it. And another shameless plug here, I started my own coffee company called Cardiology Coffee, which is to highlight the benefits of coffee on cardiovascular health, but it is also tested for glyphosate, of which is non-detectable. And it's also tested for mycotoxins, which are non-detectable. So, and a lot of times the medical doctor is like, oh, don't drink coffee. Meanwhile, they're drinking coffee out of styrofoam cups in the nurse's station or doctor's lounge. And they told you to avoid it. And if you're out there and you don't feel well on coffee, don't drink it. But if you like coffee and you like the way you feel on coffee, then I think it's beneficial to you.
I know. It's funny you mentioned that about, they'll tell you not to drink it and it's bad for you and they're drinking it. It reminds me of the stories I hear of, the 90-year-old guy or 99-year-old guy who's, drinking a fifth of scotch every day and smoking a pack of cigarettes and still outlives the guy that's, the jogger and all that. So I don't know. Well,
listen, obviously there's not many examples of that, but there always is one outlier, to that. But I think chance favors those of us who are most proactive. And, certainly anybody could look at it and say, you know what? Come on, I'm not going to do all this. I'm not going to eat well, live well, think well, and test, don't guess. And I'm not going to get out of my insurance-based, model. And I want to keep drinking and having, okay, well, good luck. But that's the freedom of it. You're free to do that. You're totally free to do that. But I want to give you my information so you know that there's another way that I believe is a better way. And that's what we do.
Absolutely. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Medical Truth Podcast. I really appreciate it. And again, your website is naturalhealthdoctor.com, which I've been posting here at the bottom.
Yes, right? Natural Heart Doctor.
I'm sorry, Natural Heart Doctor. Natural Heart Doctor. Yes.
You're not the first who kind of who made that error, but maybe it's a marketing issue that we did. But no, we are cardiologists, Natural Heart
Doctor. Yeah, naturalheartdoctor.com. I'll post that on the website on Medical Truth Podcast as well. Thank you so much for joining me, Doc. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Medical Truth Podcast. For the latest episodes, go to www.medicaltruthpodcast.com. You can also find the Medical Truth Podcast on Rumble, as well as all the major podcast platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeart.